This is a dungeon crawler game, and it's running on a stock Commodore 64. It's not using any assembly, just BASIC. So if you've ever been told BASIC is too slow to make a fun game, give me the next few minutes. That's what we're building towards, an actual fun game that's written in BASIC that you can understand, but isn't held back by the language. Yes, assembly is very fast, but you don't have to use assembly to make fun games. And a dungeon crawl is my favorite type of game to use in my tutorials because they show a lot of things that are necessary in any game, like a game loop, but they're also fun to play. And unlike a lot of games, they're actually fun for the developer to play, the programmer, because you don't necessarily have to design levels. So I'm going to break this down into features and parts so that you can follow what I'm doing, and each step builds a significant part of improving the game, so it's actually getting better all the time. Where we got up to at the moment, we managed to get the game data loading from disk, which slows everything down, but it does mean that it can load the map file. So that's one thing we want to change. We want to use procedural generation. We want it to be different every time we play. And we don't want to be loading the map from disk. But these custom characters, these graphics, they're cool. We'll load those because having it as part of the basic program actually slows down the execution of the program. It's a lot quicker to load into memory. So we'll keep doing that. We've got keyboard control, but you'll notice that we have no collision detection. So the next thing we want is to be able to pick up your health and pick up your sword. That's what we need to work on today. We want some collision detection. We want to have the maps different every single time. And let's also incorporate one of the earlier lessons, which is the Dungeons and Dragons character generator. So this is the character you start gameplay with later in the game, where as we're adding things to collect and things to fight, there'll be multiple levels and multiple dungeons to explore. We'll be able to ask the player if they want to enhance. Do they get more magical ability, or do they fight off attackers with more strength and that kind of thing? So we'll start with collision detection, and what we're going to do is when we run into something, we're going to recognize what it is and act accordingly. So how do we do that? The C64 screen starts at memory address 1024. So what we need to do is look at where the player wants to move to, the player X and Y, and see if it's a space. And if it's not a space, then we need to see what it is. For example, character 38 is a goblin, and 47 is a sword, 8 is health, 36 is cash money. That is really slow if we do a multiplication. So instead, what we do is we create a lookup table, our LUT array, and instead of doing the multiplication, all we need to do is look up using the players Y and X, and that'll tell us what's currently on the map. Of course, it's not just enough to recognize something, we have to do something with it. For example, if you walk over the gold, it needs to add to your cash. So we need to do that, but also we need to decide if we need to erase the item or if the player bounces off the item. This makes it quite efficient, even though it's Commodore 64 BASIC, because all we're doing is checking the screen for character code and then deciding what to do with it and how it affects the player and how it affects the map. And how's this map generated? Let's take a look. This is the cheat procedural generation. It actually works out pretty good straight off the bat for getting walkable dungeons. And the biggest cheat, obviously, if it's not a walkable dungeon, we've got two choices. We can start over, get a new character, get a new dungeon. And the other option is I've added a teleport. So if you press T, it'll zap you to an empty area of the map, which if there's an inaccessible part any other way, then this allows you to do it. Some games back in the day actually allowed you to walk through walls, maybe taking a hit to your health, or you had to use a spell or some other limitation. but I chose the teleport option because I think it's a neat ability anyway. If you get into trouble, you can just teleport away. But using this approach, which isn't really procedural generation at this point, they become pretty walkable dungeons. So how this works is we set up an array of the Metatiles, and each is 3 characters by 3 characters in a grid. In Commodore 64 BASIC, it's faster to use prints, and instead of having to write screen memory and color memory at the same time, the print does the job for us. And instead of positioning using pokes, here we use down, left, left, left. So the only bit that you've not seen here is the randomization. And this is why it's random rather than procedurally generated at this point. All it does is it does a random seed from the timer, and then for each row and column of the map, it places the cursor at the top left, and then it does a random. This is the metatile we want this time, from 1 to 23. We draw it, and then we get the next column, the next row. Finally, this is how the teleport works. We pick player X and Y using a random number, and then we check to see if that location contains a dot. If it doesn't contain a dot, then we have to go back and pick another number. That prevents the player from teleporting into a wall, an object, or a bad guy. What do we need to add to make this a full game? We've only got 1 level right now. We need the bad guys to move around, and we want actual combat rather than the bad guys just take your health points away. I'm going to come back with more enhancements. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Please do let me know what you think in the comments, and look forward to seeing you next time.